And next up, we've got Sarah, who is actually listed as the first in the voting. So let's make sure we don't get them confused. So Dr. Sarah Legge is a dairy scientist and educator at the University of Sydney. And she might be a familiar face as Sarah presented her findings on the calves from this same project at the DRF in 2022 at Foster. And Sarah is also part of the Dairy Up program, and she joins us today to share her findings on identifying key factors affecting dairy cow longevity. Over to you.
Okay, so I'm Sarah Legge, as they've just heard. I'll be talking to you today about identifying key factors affecting dairy cow longevity. Now, I'm sure if you've heard the speakers today, this is a word we are currently throwing around an awful lot. And it's not just a word that means nothing. It's a word that means productivity, profitability, and sustainability within our industry. It's a word that creates the future of our dairy industry. So why does it matter? After all these things that you've heard this morning, I'm sure you've already realised that it matters greatly. But it doesn't just mean longevity means a longer life. It actually means lower replacement costs, higher animal welfare. And most studies so far focus on the time period after the first calving. But the focus of this study actually works towards the first days within life and how that ultimately affects the longevity within the herd. So the ultimate question, or rather the aim of this study, is to investigate associations between early life growth traits and subsequent survival in large commercial Holstein Friesian herds, and to identify potential pre-weaning indicators of longevity. All to say, what happens when you have a calf born really matters. What you do after is up to you, and this really drives the productivity and profitability of your dairy enterprise. Or does it? That's the question. So my research was done using large-scale data from a commercial herd. We used data sets from over 14,000 animals of a single dairy enterprise. Now, this data was raw, unaltered data, so no controls were used within this study, and data included birth weight, weaning weight, milk yield, days in milk, as well as the culling, death, or herd exit of that animal. So we really wanted to focus more on that culling focus. So not culling as in the animal is killed off, culling as in that animal is removed from the herd for one reason or another. So sold to another farmer perhaps, sold off that property, moved to a different location. So we wanted to focus on reasons why someone unconsciously selects their herd, just to see whether that validates the findings of our first study. So I used several statistical methods that I'm not going to drive too far into at this very moment because it would take much longer than 5 minutes. And I think if I did it, I'd lose half of you to sleep. And at that point, I would have to do something like get you all up and moving. And again, 5 minutes doesn't give me a lot of time to get you all up and moving. So now a fun activity that I like to call compare the pair. So you might realise this is an ad from TV comparing the pair, same income, same superannuation, different results. I'd like you to think of this in terms of calves. They're born at the same weight, but within the first 5 days of life, they've consumed different amounts. And ultimately, that drives their productivity within the herd. So our previous research findings have discovered that this actually leads to a growth change within 80 kilograms being a successful animal and anything below 80 kilograms being a less successful animal. Not to say they don't enter the lactating herd, but just to say that their yield is up to 2,000 litres lower per annum than that of the calf that weans at 80 kilograms or more. So think about these two things and compare the pair. So the results from this study indicate that early growth strongly predicts longevity. Lower birth weight and weaning weight equals a higher risk of removal. I could describe this in more statistical terms, but I don't think anyone really wants to hear that at this moment. So if you do want to hear more, please pull me aside in one of the breaks and I'm happy to discuss further. But culling risk is also highest around 128 days in milk, which is quite an interesting finding given that one would think we wait till the end of lactation to sell off an animal. We found that this actually was happening a lot earlier for these lower birth weight and lower weaning weight animals. Now, when it comes to the statistics, including milk yield actually improved the prediction and strength of these models. So not just including things like birth weight and weaning weight, but also focusing on what they produced once they were in the lactating herd ultimately helped decide when they exited the herd, which I'm sure many of you sitting here are going, that's common knowledge. We all know you'd keep your highest producers. But sometimes things have to be proven by science so that we can build further and investigate deeper. But ultimately, the findings of this study were that early growth and production are connected. Weaning weight led to greater production, which led to a longer time within the herd, statistically speaking. So, what this means for Australian dairy farms, which is the reason we're all here, to find out what research is doing for our dairy farms in Australia. We're not just here to tell you about our research and how clever we all are, which many of us are very, very clever. I say that with complete bias and pride for the students that are presenting today. So birth and weaning weights are useful predictors. We've always known that birth weight and when a cow is calved into this world, that can tell you a lot about the animal. But what we're also finding is how that animal weans tells us even more about that animal. So it's not about just breeding the perfect animal, it's about utilising those first few days of life to improve that animal regardless of its genetics. These can inform early intervention and calf management steps, supports data-driven decision-making on farm. As you all know, we're in the technological era, so you're all tracking things and measuring things, and I'm sure half of you here today are wearing a phone in your pocket which might measure your steps, measure your sleep, tell you when you're not being active enough. And this is a similar thing on our farms. We've got so many different forms of technology monitoring and measuring our animals, so it would be a shame not to use it. And this aligns with sustainability, welfare and cost efficiency goals, all in one even spread. So that early lifetime prevention of failure means that you are ultimately creating a more sustainable animal, better welfare for that animal, and a more cost efficient because you're reducing the replacement costs. So the next steps within these studies is to integrate more housing, nutrition and reproduction data into it, and also heat stress data for phenomics, and working out what we're doing around these key areas within our Australian dairy industry. So some take-home measures I want you to remember. Calf growth predicts longevity. Weaning at birth and weight at birth and weight at weaning matters. Early lactation is a risk point, so focus on those transition cows and make sure you're getting the most out of them. Prioritising calf care pays off, both for welfare, productivity and sustainability. And I'd really like to pay clear attention to this slide and thank the Dairy Up collaborators. This is a really unique project that we've successfully done so far and ends this May, where you can also scan the little codes on your cows in your bags and read all about the research done by this wonderful collaborative group. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. Do we have any questions for Sarah? Yep, Neil?
Sarah, great presentation. You've talked about weaning weight. We can all wean at 80 kilograms. It's just a matter of time. What's the interaction between time to getting to that weaning weight?
So this study was measuring up to 56 days. So this was rapid weaning in a lot of ways. And it was seeing how quickly you could get to that 80 kilogram at a measured rate rather than just pump lots of milk into them, get them really dependent on milk. It was more about a balanced weaning approach to get them growing at a steady rate to 80 kilograms at that 56 days. Any other questions?
Excellent. Yep, down the front. Have we got a mic coming?
Or a big voice?
Have you done any work on conception? Oh, you said that at birth, I guess you take it from when a calf's birth, but have you done any work or if there's any study on from conception to birth, if that's the nutrition of the dam, how that dictates the calf's weaning weight?
That is a study I'd like to do. So if you look at the man to your left and smile really nicely at him, I'm sure we can work on something like that.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah.